Good afternoon. I don't know if I'm on or not. Can you hear me? Yep. Good afternoon. My name is Ben Reeves, and I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council Vice-Chair. DEI is playing a much larger role than ever before in our lives and in our interactions at work, school, communities, and at each realtor association, local, state, and national. To challenge ourselves to be better, CAAR is committed to bringing influential speakers to broaden our mindset and change the way that we approach issues and situations. We encourage you to listen, ask questions, and understand one another. Whether you are here in person or joining us today on Zoom, you are showing a desire to be a better person. And with that, the DEI Council wants to thank each and every one of you for being part of the DEI conversation. At this time, I would like to thank our event sponsors, Fulton Mortgage Company and Virginia Housing. I would like to invite Reed Thompson of Fulton Mortgage Company to say a few words.
Thank you. It's good to be here and appreciate the chance to sponsor this. I know I'm not the main event, so I'll be very brief. I just want to say a couple things to keep in mind. We at Fulton can do it all. A few things I want you to remember: any buyers, first-time buyers especially, anybody looking at FHA, USDA, VA, send them our way for a second opinion. We've got some excellent first-time buyer programs. There's a flyer in your packet, and I've got another one out on the table there about a couple of them. We have another one coming online tomorrow. So I'll just leave it at that. If anybody's talking about those types of programs or first-time buyer, send them our way. We will at least give them a good education to make sure they're making an informed decision. Other thing I'll say, Shannon and I were just talking about how there's no inventory. We all know this. That's no surprise. So a lot of people that wouldn't normally be considering new construction are starting to think about that. I'm sure you're having some of your buyers talk about that. We have both for construction to permanent, but also turnkey construction, so for the larger builders or the production builders. On our 7-6 arm, we now have a 0.5% knocked off the rate right there. So for new construction. So anybody considering new construction, send them our way too, because we can get them, we take care of everybody you send us, but on the new construction especially, we've got a really good rate discount right now on that. And nobody should be looking at a 30-year fixed in this rate environment anyway. 7-6 arms the way to go. We have excellent pricing on that. More importantly, great service. We love working with you all. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you very much, Reed. Next, I would like to welcome Frank Webster to join me on stage to share a few words from Virginia Housing.
Well, good afternoon and holiday greetings from Virginia Housing. This is I think the third time I've been up here in about the last 3 weeks. So I feel like I need to join CAAR. All right. This is the best association, by the way. So my name is Frank Webster. I am Business Development Officer for Virginia Housing. I cover Charlottesville and the entire western region of the state. We appreciate the opportunity to sponsor this event for CAAR, and we always support diversity, equity, inclusion in such a vitally important area as housing. For 50 years, Virginia Housing has been a leader in the work of making sure that all members of the community have equal access to the benefits of homeownership. We continue this work now and in the future by working with realtors, lenders, local governments, and nonprofit organizations to provide significant resources that help lower barriers and put home ownership within the grasp of those who otherwise might be left out or excluded. So these, I've mentioned these to you before, but I've been told the more you say it, the more it gets received. The resources that we provide, we work with all the local lenders. We work with all the programs that you're accustomed to. And when we provide assistance in every area that helps overcome barriers that prevent first-time homebuyers from getting into their homes. So we have down payment and closing cost assistance. We have lower interest rates. We have tax credits that will help lower a borrower's federal income tax liability. And many times your first-time homebuyers can meld all of those benefits together on one transaction, and we hit every angle of home ownership and affordability to help lower the barriers for those individuals. So we get out as often as we can to tout this and to make sure everybody knows this. If you would like to know more about how Virginia Housing could help the Charlottesville area homebuyers get into their homes, I'll be here at the reception tonight. And I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with each one of you individually so I can tell you more how we can help and you can tell me how we can help. That's even more important. So thank you again for having this event and for having Virginia Housing here. And enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Frank. If you haven't already visited our sponsors, I encourage you to do so during our holiday reception, which is today after the event. At this time, we'll move into our main presentation, Fresh Broadband, the Politics of Rural Connectivity, presented by Dr. Christopher Alley. After Chris's presentation, we'll hold a question and answer with Chris, Neil Williamson of the Free Enterprise Forum, and myself. If you'd like to learn more about each panelist, please refer to today's handouts. Their bios are on there. And at this time, I will hand it over to Chris.
Hi, everybody. It is a great honor to be standing here in front of you all. Thank you so much to CAAR. Thank you so much to the DEI Council. Thank you so much to my husband, Ben, who introduced me. I mean, it's a very special thing to be introduced by your husband. So, you know, I'm just all smiles here and really exciting to be able to share some of my thoughts on broadband and broadband in Central Virginia with all of you today. So a little bit of who I am. Obviously, Christopher Alley. I'm the Pioneers Chair in Telecommunications at Penn State University. I was at the University of Virginia for the last 9 years. I hold a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. I've written a couple of books, most recently, shameless plug, Fresh Broadband, The Politics of Rural Connectivity, where a lot of my talk is going to be based on today is the finding of the book. I also write for a lot of public venues like the New York Times and The Hill and CBC and Realtor Magazine. Born and raised in Winnipeg, Canada, so I know a good winter. And I like to share a little trivia fact of a former national level figure skater in Canada. So, you know, little sequence here, right? So what are we talking about? What are we all doing here today? We're obviously talking about broadband. But to me, we're going to be talking about broadband plus everything else. And what I mean by that is that broadband is just the first step in connectivity, getting wires in the ground, getting wires in the air, getting a connection, right? That is only the first step to getting connected. So we're going to look at the kind of lifespan of connectivity, and with a particular focus here on Central Virginia. So a couple of take-home points for all of you. First and foremost is that at the end of the day, broadband is about people. It's actually not about technology. It's not about companies. It's not about policy. It's about people, because at the end of the day, you can have the fastest connectivity in the world, but if you can't afford to use it, if you don't know how to use it, that connectivity is useless. So broadband is about people, just like real estate, right, is about people. Second is that broadband is a necessity. I think there's something that the COVID pandemic taught us, is that at the end of the broadband is not a luxury anymore. It's not a nice to have. Broadband is crucial. Broadband is a necessity. Broadband is critical infrastructure, just as important as electricity, as water, as sewage. As I said before, the other take-home point for those of you taking notes, and of course there will be a quiz at the end of this, is that connectivity is only the first step in achieving digital equity, right? And I'm going to be talking about what digital equity actually is, but connectivity is only the first step. This fourth part is that the digital divide is actually about inequality and power, and this is where it really intersects with a lot of work that you're doing as DEI representatives. Because if we look at who is least likely to be connected, right? We're thinking low-income families. We're thinking rural communities. We're thinking minority communities, particularly Black and Latinx communities. We're thinking about newcomers. We're thinking about indigenous populations. The exact same types of populations that have historically been marginalized are those that are left off the digital grid. So broadband is really about inequality. And where I'm going to conclude today is that CAAR and realtors have a huge role to play in addressing digital scarcity in Central Virginia, in the Commonwealth, and in the country. Okay, goodness. So this is a quick outline of what we're talking about. I have packed a lot into my hour. I tend to talk really quickly because I tend to get really excited about this topic. If anyone needs me to slow down, or if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt me, because I love a good question. But just a couple of things. We're going to talk about what is broadband. I want to talk about where broadband is in the United States. I want to talk about broadband and inequality, which is the point of our talk today. What some of the lessons we learned about broadband during the pandemic. We're going to talk about infrastructure. We're going to talk about infrastructure in Virginia. We're going to talk about challenges. And last but not least, I want to wrap up with some recommendations that I have for all of you. Because I think, you know, if the old mantra of real estate and is location, 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 I think today it's broadband, 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 right? Folks want high-speed broadband. And with that, we have to figure out what exactly high-speed broadband is. So like I said, a lot of this is based on about 7 years of research that culminated in my book, Farm Fresh Broadband, The Politics of Rural Connectivity, which is an analysis of federal and state policies regarding the subsidization, deployment, and regulation of broadband. And I like to describe the book as a story of failure and a story of promise. It's a story of failure because it chronicles the failures of the federal government to connect the unconnected. But it's a story of promise because it champions local communities who have connected themselves, often in the absence of policy and private market support. And a lot of those communities are here in Virginia, which is super cool. What did I do? I read a lot. I read a lot for this book, about 15,000 pages of documents. I did about 90 interviews. But here's the thing, halfway through writing my book, I realized that maybe my readers won't be interested in 300 pages of policy analysis. I mean, I'm interested in 300 pages of policy analysis, but in other words, I needed to put a human face on broadband. And so in the summer of 2018, my hound dog Tuna and I drove 3,600 miles across the country talking to folks about broadband, talking to anyone and everyone. We talked to farmers, we talked to state representatives, we talked to broadband providers, we talked to local mayors, trying to get an understanding of how broadband is lived in a daily life. And so, you know, thank you to Tuna as the best research assistant in the world. All right, okay, with a little bit of this preamble, let's get to some of the meat and potatoes here. Just a show of hands, who thinks they have a good idea of what broadband is? Okay, all right, this is good. I'm not gonna call on anyone, don't worry. But I think the fact that so many of us are here and saying like, okay, we've probably heard this word, right? Broadband. You know, we've heard the word. What exactly is it? What exactly is it when we talk about broadband? So let's look at a couple of definitions. If we're looking at the official federal definition of broadband, broadband is an always-on internet connection of 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload. Okay, what the hell does that mean? Another definition is that broadband is provided by a series of technologies that give users the ability to send and receive data at volumes and speeds necessary to support a number of applications. Broadband is often thought to be synonymous with high-speed internet, right? We often use those terms interchangeably. So you can think about it that way. But we're going to focus a lot on this question of speed because not all broadband is created equal. So keep in mind two numbers here, 25/3. 25/3, that's the current definition of broadband. It's woefully inadequate. And the Federal Communications Commission is looking to raise the definition of broadband to 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload. And don't worry, I'm going to explain what all these things mean. There's some important numbers here because it does impact the type of technologies that can actually be counted as deploying broadband. So we talked about megabits per second, right? Not megabytes per second. A byte and a bit are two different things. Megabits per second. So in terms of what do you need in terms of at your home, right? Well, Netflix, who here watches Netflix or any streaming? You know, we do love a good binge of Murder, She Wrote. Murder, She Wrote is no longer on Netflix for those of you who are following, by the way. If you're watching regular Netflix, right, you are gobbling up between 3 and 5 megabits per second. Right? If you're doing like high capacity 4K, that's 25 megabits per second. Anyone here an online game player? No online gamers? Didn't see my husband raise his hand. But, if you're doing online gaming, I'm not talking about like Candy Crush, but like kind of multi-role play game, lots of graphics, you're consuming about 30 megabits per second. Zoom, who here is on Zoom? Yeah, okay, there you go, right? If you're using Zoom, you are using about 6 megabits per second download, 2 megabits per second upload. Download, by the way, is the information that you're pulling to your computer. Upload is the information you're pushing back. So whenever you upload a document, you're uploading, right? Whenever you pull something when you stream, you're downloading. And if anyone has an Oculus Rift, anyone have Oculus? Okay, you're consuming almost 600 megabits of download speed. That's the virtual reality goggles, yeah. So if our definition of broadband in this country is 25 megabits per second download, and you're a family of 4, what happens if 4 people want to stream 4K Netflix? Very slow. You're going to get that spinning wheel of death, right? You're going to get the buffering. You're going to get that delay. And this is where speed and definition become so important. And these numbers here, they're not like, you can't stack 5 on top of 30 on top of it. That's not how it works. There's always breaks. So what now we're seeing is that a family, and I'm gonna go to this next slide here. The average household today has 16 connected devices, and each one of these use bandwidth. Each one of them all the time. So laptops, phones, tablets, televisions, smartwatches, thermostats, security systems, door locks, fridges, Roombas, right? All of these consume bandwidth. So if you're a fully connected house, that definition of broadband will not apply to you, right? You're going to need a lot more bandwidth, which means you might need a different type of technology serving your home, right? Who here has a device that is not listed here? These were just an internet connected device. Anyone's car? Anyone own a Tesla? Okay, all right. Your Tesla is consuming bandwidth, right? Anyone here have a digital toaster? You can program, or our air fryer. Our air fryer consumes bandwidth. Our air fryer is IP connected. We can program it, right? All of these things consume bandwidth. So we need to be thinking about it's not just your TV, it's not just Netflix, not just Zoom, it's all of these devices that are impacting how good your speeds are. And just as a show of hands, who here has ever been frustrated because their internet is slow? I rest my point, let's go drink. No, so these are things to keep in mind. This is what's gobbling up your speeds, right? And there's other things too that we'll talk about. Okay, we're gonna do a quick technology lesson, and this is kind of the Coles Notes versions of the different broadband technologies, or the technologies that are considered to offer broadband speeds, right? The first one is DSL. This stands for Digital Subscriber Line. Digital Subscriber Line is the type, it's a copper wire. It's the type of internet you're probably going to get from a phone company. It was really prevalent in the late 1990s. This is kind of the generation after dial-up. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember dial-up, where you had to dial in and you go beep, 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 right? DSL was the next generation. DSL is particularly prominent in rural communities. In fact, DSL is the most prominent broadband technology. We have a couple of problems with DSL. Anyone here have DSL? Anyone here have CenturyLink, for instance? No? Okay. Sorry about that. Couple of problems with DSL. DSL is a slow technology. You're not going to be able to get those high speeds. You're not going to be able to get that 120, I said. You might be able to get to your 25.3, right? Which might be good for one person. At 25.3, if you're a family of 1, you can probably stream Netflix and be on Instagram at the same time and send emails. That's probably not a problem. Any more than that, you're going to run into some problems. DSL also rots. Cable or copper wires rot. So oftentimes the connection degrades. And last but not least, if you're 3 miles or more away from, we would call it the nodal access point, the DSLAM, right? You often see like a cabinet on a telephone pole, right? If you're 3 miles away from that, your signal drops dramatically. So DSL is impacted by the distance you literally are from your provider, right? We're phasing DSL out, but still it is the most prominent technology in rural communities. And a lot of times your clients might be, particularly if they're going to a particularly rural area, are probably going to be using DSL, to be honest. Then we've got satellite. Anyone here have satellite internet? Or anyone here ever had a client? Ma'am, are you satisfied with your satellite internet? Not always, right? Okay, so satellite, there's 2 types of satellites. There's geosynchronous satellite and there's low Earth orbital satellite. Geosynchronous satellite, they're everywhere, right? This is HughesNet and Viasat. These are the 2 major companies. A satellite is typically very expensive. It comes with low data caps, which means that you can't download a lot or else they'll cut you off, right? It is very slow upload and download speeds. In fact, most times it won't even meet the national definition. It has high latency. And what latency is when you send a request through the internet, right? When you put your website in, and the delay it takes to come back to you, that's called latency. And for us, we might get frustrated because our website doesn't load. But think about if you're doing, again, like online gaming where you need real-time stuff, or if you're a stockbroker where you need microsecond transactions. So that latency can mean the difference of millions of dollars. It's also subject to inclement weather. So if there's clouds, if it's raining, if there are pine trees eat wireless signals for breakfast. So satellite technology is not the greatest. You probably have all heard of a company called Starlink. Starlink is rolling in. It's better speeds. It can get you maybe upwards of 120, but it's still very much in beta testing. And there are lots of concerns about cost and capacity. One report said that Starlink's actually going to run out of room by 2025. So all of the kind of hype, I would caution you all against kind of being very mindful against this hype of Starlink. And I hope no one's listening from Starlink. You're gonna sue me. A lot of, yes. Yeah. There are 3 low Earth orbital satellite. Oh, sure. Yeah. The question was, does Starlink have any competition as a low Earth orbital satellite internet company? There are 3. There's Project Kuiper, which is Amazon's, and then there's OneWeb. OneWeb, my understanding, is not yet in the United States and primarily operating in Europe, but Starlink will see competition in the future. Yeah, thank you for the question. Then we've got mobile, right? And this is when you're using data. You're not on Wi-Fi with your phone, but you're pulling in data, right? Mobile or mobile devices such as a hotspot, right? These are your providers. This is Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint is one company now. For those of you who have used a lot of data on your phones, you'll know that it's quite expensive. You often will get a data cap. Signal loss. I mean, you go 5 minutes out of Charlottesville, you're not getting a signal on some providers, right? And I hate to be a spoiler, but 5G is not coming to rural communities anytime soon, right? This is hype. The best what we'll see in rural communities is they'll call it 5G, but it will function exactly like 4G. It's a bit of an industry misnomer here. And what we do see is a lot of rural communities who can't get a fixed wired internet connection. A lot of families are relying on their phones to do their interneting, right? And they'll turn their phone into a hotspot. I've heard of families who toggle between 4 or 5 different cell phones throughout a month, which can be $500 or $600 or $700, right? Because they can't have a fixed connection because there's no provider there, and yet they're using their phones. They're maxing out those hotspots. All right. A technology that's becoming particularly prevalent is called fixed wireless. For those of you who might know, like All Points Broadband here in Virginia, it's a fixed wireless company. Fixed wireless is where you run a wire to a tower, and then that tower transmits a wireless signal to your house. It is very common in rural areas because it can cover a large distance. It is dependent on what's called the type of backhaul. Are you using microwave backhaul? Are you using fiber optic backhaul? You need line of sight, right? You need to be able to see the tower, which means pine trees, can't have pine trees. And there's a lot of equipment repairs. So a lot of rural communities have used fixed wireless as a bit of a stopgap. We talk so much about fiber optics, right? Fiber. Fiber is very expensive. And so what we see a lot of rural communities do when they're looking at funding the next generation of broadband is they'll fund a fixed wireless network. So they'll bring a fiber optic cable to the town, maybe through Main Street so the businesses can get fiber optics, and then they'll connect it to a tower for residential broadband. That's called fixed wireless. Cable's another internet technology. Anyone here have Xfinity? Okay, the majority. So you're getting cable internet, right? Cable and coaxial, this is Comcast Xfinity, very prevalent in urban areas, the most used broadband technology in the country right now. It's not particularly prevalent in remote areas, and it privileges download over upload, right? And this is very important. So, we talked about these speeds, 25.3, 120. These numbers are asymmetric, right? Your download is faster than your upload. That's a symptom of technology. And the reason that's important is that, you'll see a Comcast Xfinity commercial and they'll say like blazing fast download speeds and you can, stream at the speed of light and that's awesome. But what's going to be super slow? Uploading your taxes, right? Or uploading, say you're an influencer and you're uploading your latest YouTube video. That's upload. That's going to be slower on cable. Last but not least, we've got fiber. Fiber has been called the future-proof broadband technology. Fiber can withstand an almost unlimited amount of bandwidth. So, we talked about 25.3, that's the definition of broadband. Fiber can offer 1,000. It's called gigabit symmetric, right? So your download speeds are as fast as your upload speeds. It can handle anything we throw at, which is pretty cool. The problem, fiber optics are very expensive to deploy, between $27,000 and $100,000 per mile. So here in Charlottesville, we've got the major fiber provider is Ting, right? And it is a massive difference. Has anyone ever experienced fiber internet? You have fiber. Oh goodness, we're all so jealous. Can I ask, what's your experience been like? You know, fiber versus. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It is. Yeah. 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 And I bet you it never buffers, right? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So with fiber, every single person in this room could stream a 4K video or be on Zoom and you won't get any interference, right? So fiber is what everyone is pushing for. But again, the problem with fiber is the cost, and that cost often gets passed on to local communities. So communities have to make the right choices for themselves and the type of technologies they have. All right, so remember how I said not all broadband is created equal, and this is just to like really drive home my point. So, you know, forgive me on this, right? Okay, so the median download speed of DSL is 15 megabits per second. That's the median in the country. The median download speed of fiber optics is 940 megabits per second, right? Huge difference. And this is about This is about technology we're talking about. So this is really when we're talking about 1990s era internet connectivity and 2030 internet connectivity, right? So this is why oftentimes if you're reading about broadband in the news, you're reading about fiber. But again, I just, you know, we can all be very bullish about fiber, but it's not going to work in certain situations. If you are a farmer, fiber isn't going to work because you need a wireless connection, right? You can't literally plug a fiber optic cable into a combine. I know it sounds glib, but you can't. You know, so we still need these mix of technologies, but the world is moving towards fiber optics, right? And that might be a question that your clients are getting. Does my new house have fiber, right? So right now, you know, if you're in Charlottesville, you're looking at Ting. If you're in Nelson County, in Louisa County, Savannah County, parts of Albemarle, you're going to be looking at Firefly. If you're in Orange County, you're going to be looking at FiberLink. So this is one thing that we can all do is research who's providing what. Yes, ma'am. Lumos, yeah. So that's CenturyLink's fiber product. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. So in Western Albemarle, Lumos, which is CenturyLink rebranded. Yeah, it's still CenturyLink, but that's their fiber optic product. They are getting fiber. So you will get this fast. You will get the fast speed with Lumos. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great point. All right. Okay. Why does any of this matter? Right? This is what we're all doing here. I call this in my work the pillars of broadband. Why do we think about the importance of broadband? Why are we all on this? Why did Congress just allocate $65 billion from the Infrastructure Act to broadband? And there are 6 major ways I can convince you. I don't think anyone in this room needs convincing, right? But we can reinforce it. The first is economic development. We know that broadband to a community will probably lower unemployment, will raise GDP. For those of you in this room, a fiber optic connection to a home raises a home's value by 3.1%, right? 3.1% for fiber. On the flip side, I'm sure a lot of you know this, it's a lot harder to sell a house if it doesn't have internet, right? Absolutely. Education, we saw this during the pandemic. High-speed internet, affordable internet is a deal breaker for contemporary education. Before the pandemic, 70% of teachers in the United States were assigning homework online, 70%. But something I'll show you in a few slides is that 18% of rural school children do not have access to the internet, right? Health, telehealth, again, during the pandemic, particularly vital in rural communities where we're losing doctors and nurses, where telehealth is going to be such a big thing. And I'm not just talking about diagnostics here, just even things like uploading documents for doctors requires a high-speed, secure connection. I've heard of doctors who have a local practice but have to drive into the county seat to upload their data, right? So this is a game changer, even for that mundane paperwork when it comes to healthcare. By the way, what I would just want back to this economic development point, credit card machines and ATMs and gas stations all run on the internet. So your credit card won't work if you don't have a broadband connection. Civic engagement, Those with an internet connection, a high-speed internet connection at home, are more likely to engage with their local officials than those without, right? It matters for civic engagement. Public safety, and obviously Ben and I have had a lot of conversations about this, right? Our first responders need universal coverage. And here's a great example. In California, during the wildfires a couple of years ago, the California firefighters were relying on Verizon's cell phone network, right, to talk. Well, Verizon noticed that there was a huge surge in traffic in particular areas. And so what did they do? They lowered the connectivity. They cut off firefighters, right? This is ridiculous. Now, Verizon got into a lot of trouble for this, but public safety is so important. And last but not least is quality of life. Quality of life is, I think, something that often gets neglected when we talk about broadband. We often talk about economic development and education and healthcare and all that great stuff. But quality of life, we all have the right to stream what we want to stream. We all have the right to game what we want to game, right? That involves a high-speed broadband connection. So these are what I call the pillars of broadband. All right, a little bit of terminology here. Many of us have often heard the term digital divide. Who here has ever heard the term digital divide? Okay, a couple of us, right? More than half, that's great. Digital divide is often meant to be the haves and have-nots. Either you have internet connectivity or you don't have internet connectivity, right? That's a little bit binary. We're seeing a move now away from terminology like the digital divide to be talking about terminology like digital inclusion. Digital inclusion, which obviously comes out of this kind of DEI language, thinks not just about availability, do I have a connection, but also affordability, can I afford it? Adoption, do I know how to use it? And accessibility, do I have the hardware? Do I have a computer, right? So it's a much more kind of all-encompassing idea of the digital divide. So you might see a lot more terms like digital inclusion and digital equity if you're researching broadband. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. All right, I'm actually going to skip these. All right, let's talk about digital inequality in the United States. So according to the Federal Communications Commission, 95.6% of the country has access to the internet at the speeds of 25 free. That includes 98.8% of the urban population, 82.7% of the rural population, and 79.1% of the tribal population. Here's the problem. Those numbers are wrong. Most estimates suggest that they are wrong by at least 50%, right? So one study found that instead of 19 million Americans unconnected, it was 42 million Americans connected. Microsoft a couple of years ago found that 162 million Americans lacked access to the internet at broadband speeds. We are talking about a massive gap just in connectivity, right? And I can answer questions about why the FCC got all this data so wrong. And the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, which oversees broadband. And they've revised their map, and we've got a new set of maps, and I'm going to talk about that in a hot second. But this has been part of the problem is we actually don't know who is connected and who is underconnected. And that's been part of the problem. When we drill down into looking at broadband as a symptom of inequality, we find that 29% of Black adults do not have a home broadband connection. 35% of Latinx adults do not have a home broadband connection. 51% of those living on tribal lands do not have a broadband connection. And this compares to only 20% of the white population who do not have it. So remember when I said that broadband inequality maps onto all these other existing inequalities? This is what I'm talking about here. Who is likely to be disenfranchised socially, politically, economically? The same communities who don't have access to the internet. Let's talk particularly about rural communities, which is my area of research. At least 17% of rural Americans lack access to broadband. 18% of rural school children lack access. Only 72% of rural Americans with access actually subscribe, and oftentimes that's due to cost. Rural Americans pay almost 30% more for broadband, usually a crappier broadband, than urban Americans. 30% more in a country that already pays the most in the developed world for internet. Rural Americans pay a 30% premium. Only 19% of rural Americans have a choice in their broadband provider. And what does that mean? When you're one actor, you can price it in however the hell you want, right? So we see part of this problem is not just getting wires in the ground, it's actually encouraging competition to lower down those prices, particularly for rural and remote areas. All right, at least 60,000 farms in the United States still use dial-up. Who here remembers dial-up, just out of curiosity? Okay, all right, good. 60,000 farms still use dial-up. About 1% of Virginians still use dial-up, and that includes here in Albemarle County. There's dial-up providers here in Albemarle County, right? There's more bad news for farmers. For those of you who are in farming communities, 60% of farmers say their internet connections are inadequate to run their business. 78% do not have a choice in provider. Only 40% have a fixed connection, that's like fiber or DSL or cable, and 37% want to increase their use of data in their options. Yes.
Hold on one second. Our Zoom audience can't hear our in-person.
So my question is, how are they using that? So I
Yeah.
live on a farm. My dad actively farms it. And before I moved there and found Blazing Hog, which I don't even know which option that was, and it's subpar, but it's better than dial-up. The internet's not designed for dial-up anymore. It
Right.
doesn't.
No,
like,
it
takes
isn't.
20
Websites
minutes to
won't even
load.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes 20 minutes to load Gmail. Like, how are they using it?
So I don't know for certain how they're using dial-up. My estimation would be they're not actually using it. That's just what they have, right? I can tell you, I mean, there's a whole generation of precision agriculture that if you have high performance broadband, you can do some amazing things, and you can read chapter 5 of my book about that. But we can talk about that later, about all the cool things that you can do in next generation agriculture because of the internet. It's amazing. Variable rate technologies and machine to machine learning. Oh, it's awesome. Hog farming has really improved. Okay, let's look at a little bit more of, we look at the intersection between race and rurality when it comes to broadband. 40% of the rural white population does not have access to broadband. 52% of the rural Hispanic population does not have access. 44% of the rural Black population does not have access. 67% of the rural tribal or Native Alaskan population do not have access to broadband, right? Again, these digital divides that I'm talking about, it's not just exclusively rural, it's not just exclusively race, it's not just exclusively income. They intersect, right? So if you are a Black family living in a rural community that happens to be low income, you're gonna struggle to get connected. Okay, remember how I said that we pay the most, right? More people lack broadband in this country because of affordability, not because of availability. The average American pays $84 a month for broadband. $84 a month. That is brutal. Most estimates say that a low-income family can afford maybe $10 a month for broadband. That's a family making under $30,000 a year. $84 a month. And this is obviously a problem. This is not just a rural problem, it's an urban problem, it's a tribal problem, right? And like approximately 18 million households cannot afford broadband. 18% of New York residents can't afford the internet. Again, 26% of low-income Americans rely only on a smartphone. 44% of low-income Americans do not have a home broadband service, and 46% of low-income Americans don't own a computer, right? So this is where we have to think broadly about the digital divide. It's not just connectivity, it's affordability, it's computer ownership, it's skills development. And that's my next slide, actually. I know I'm moving fast, and forgive me on this. We may have heard, has anyone ever heard of a hotspot? Yeah, hotspots are devices about the size of a phone that connect to mobile internet, right? And they're often used in rural communities who don't have access to a fixed provider. And we may have seen libraries loan them out. We certainly saw schools loan them out. During the pandemic, there was actually a national shortage of hotspots because everyone was trying to get connected. And there's a professor at the University of Texas called named Sharon Strover, who's a mentor and a friend of mine. And she coined this term. She was doing research on libraries lending out hotspots to low-income families. And she said that, someone said that having access to the internet makes me feel like everybody else. And so she coined this term called digital dignity that sticks with me every time I do my work, digital dignity. And I think that when we're in the mission of connectivity, we're in the mission of digital dignity, helping folks feel like everybody else. And this is a very powerful message for me. Digital dignity. All right, I'm gonna keep moving on. So one of the questions we were talking about when we were prepping for this, and this is why I have so many slides because there's so much to talk about, which is like, how did we let this happen? Like what the hell happened here? And I'm gonna move really fast over this, but there's a couple of things that I identified in my book is, how did this happen? How did this gap get so big? Why haven't we done more? And I'll say that between 2009 and 2017, the country spent $47 billion on broadband. $47 billion just on deployment. That's not affordability. $47 billion just on getting wires in the ground. So why isn't this shrunk, right? Why are we still talking about this? Well, the first problem is the way we've defined broadband, 25.3, right? Remember that number, 25.3. What that does is it allows companies to roll out subpar technologies. This is why we still have DSL, right? Because it counts as broadband and it's cheaper to deploy, right? So you're getting these subsidies. What do you rather? Do you want to, would you rather the most expensive technology in a low income area, which is, I'm going to talk about digital redlining in a second, or do you deploy the cheaper technology because it counts as broadband? So companies are using these numbers as a ceiling to meet rather than a floor to build upon. So 25.3, not good enough. Mapping, as I've said, we've a massive problem with mapping. We don't know who is connected and who is underconnected. And some communities got underfunded, some communities got overfunded. We saw this in the most recent FCC funding process where they ended up funding like parks and parking lots because they weren't paying attention to actual areas that needed the money. And then we're also seeing a lot more instances, or at least a lot more reporting on digital discrimination and digital redlining. And of course, I know that in y'all's profession, you're very knowledgeable about redlining. In digital redlining, it happens when a company is serving subpar technologies to low-income communities and high-speed internet to other communities. And we see this happen a lot. There was a great report by, I think it was called Market Watch, that actually chronicled this in 38 different cities, where companies are literally sometimes dividing a street. Low income on one side gets one technology. And then, wealthier communities get fiber and the future-proof technologies, right? The FCC is actually investigating this right now. So hopefully we'll see some movement. And then money. So that $47 billion, right? Most of it went to providers. Well, it usually went to the largest telecommunications companies, and by that I mean AT&T and CenturyLink and Windstream and Frontier, but with very, very little oversight. So they allowed them, for instance, to build these subpar networks without much accountability. In fact, in 2 instances in 2018 and 2019, 2 companies who had gotten federal money defaulted. They didn't do their build outs, and they still were eligible for more money. So there's been very little federal oversight on this. So this is a little bit of explanation for how we got to where we are today. And again, I'm sorry, I know I'm moving quickly. So broadband in the pandemic, March 2020, the world was sent home and immediately everybody went online, right? Immediately. And then we suddenly saw a lot of concerns around, can the internet keep up, right? So 782 million people came online during the pandemic. Global internet use increased by about 10%. Zoom went up by 535% during the pandemic. Their stock also went up by 500%, by the way. So like Zoom just killed it like during the pandemic. And then we worried, okay, what happens? Like, can everyone keep up? Like we're all using these connections, and Ben and I certainly noticed it at our home when we were working from home. We have cable, we have Comcast at home. Cable internet slows down the more people are using the network. Fiber doesn't, but cable does. So, during the middle of the day, I'm teaching a class, Ben's on a meeting. We got that spinning wheel of death, right? And I'm seeing a lot of nods. So this is one of the problems with cable. Can the internet handle it, right? What else did we learn about broadband during the pandemic? We learned that broadband, according to the United Nations, was a matter of life and death. We learned that those with high performance broadband were more likely to social distance than those without. If you had broadband in your home, you were more likely to social distance. Life and death during the pandemic. Students with broadband, we learned, were likely to have a GPA that at least half a letter grade higher than those without. That's substantial, right? That's a B to a B plus, right? And we've heard stories of those without broadband having to drive to the parking lots of McDonald's and local libraries. Libraries became the heroes of the pandemic, by the way, during this time. Big on libraries. Oh, sorry about that. So we're hearing these stories as well. So we learned a lot about broadband being a necessity and not a luxury. So along comes this thing called the Infrastructure Act, which was passed last year. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar. $1 trillion to bolster the economy. And $65 billion went towards broadband in a couple of different programs. $42 billion is going to go to deployment. And this is kind of important because this is where y'all are going to have a role. Not literally in this class, we're not going to dance broadband, but every state is guaranteed $100 million. Every state must complete a 5-year broadband plan. And Virginia is slated to get around $800 million in broadband. And how Virginia is going to do this is it's going to be through public-private partnerships. So for those of you who are active in your counties, counties are going to be major players in trying to access this money from the state. There's also $14 billion for affordability. This subsidizes broadband by $30 a month for low-income families and $75 a month for those on tribal land. The problem here is that the money is going to run out in 2024, right? So these families might once again find themselves unconnected or disconnected because they're not going to be able to afford it. There's also $2.75 billion for digital equity. Digital equity means things like skill training. It makes things like hardware. It makes things like digital literacy. And states, again, are going to be the ones deploying this money. So Virginia's going to see a lot of money. And so, for instance, if CAAR wanted to start what's called a digital navigators program, where they might train some of y'all to be kind of like technicians to help folks troubleshoot their technologies, you can access that. You can be trained using this $2.75 billion digital navigators. There's actually an amazing program in Northern New York where they've trained Meals on Wheels drivers to be digital navigators to help seniors and those at home navigate their digital troubles. Brilliant, brilliant. I love it. Okay, takeaway. Lots of focus on states and localities, and this is why it's so important. There's a couple of cool things I wanted to talk about. Just what I've already talked about. It Takes a Village, which is this upstate New York. Again, we've seen libraries loan mobile devices. Libraries again being the heroes of the pandemic. A great organization called Black Churches for Broadband, which is now called Black Churches for Digital Equity. And what they're doing is they're using Black churches, which are incredible community centers, to get the word out about the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is under-enrolled right now. So they're using these spaces to really talk about digital equity. And one of my favorite ones is in Louisa County. Anyone from Louisa? Louisa County did this thing called WOW, Wireless on Wheels, where they rolled out solar-powered hotspots to unconnected communities to make particularly for school kids, to get them connected during the pandemic. It was a stopgap. We can all acknowledge, it was a Band-Aid. You can't, but I love this type of ingenuity of local communities. This wasn't the big guys. This wasn't AT&T and Comcast doing it. This was Louisa County. These are Black churches. This is Northern New York, right? These are libraries. Broadband is fundamentally local. And I think that is super cool. All right. I've already said how communities are doing it. In Virginia, now we're getting a little more Virginia here. We're seeing electric cooperatives really step up to the plate. We've already heard about Firefly. Right? This is started in Nelson County, and they've actually moved out into 13 counties. And one of the great things about Firefly is that it really was a public-private partnership. So this is the Central Virginia Electric Cooperative partnered with Nelson County. So Nelson County gave them a tremendous amount of money through, their ARPA grants. And anytime Nelson County had money, a lot of it got funneled into Firefly. No, funneled is not the right word. Was partnered with Firefly, which provided fiber to the home. Nelson County is slated to be the most connected county in Virginia by 2025 with fiber optics, right? This is awesome. This is how like Afton Mountain has fiber, and we're struggling here, right? Now, they did just get a huge grant from the state to do 13 counties, and Albemarle is one of those counties that we're gonna see Firefly move into Albemarle County in the next few years, which is cool. But to me, this is like the flagship of what electric cooperatives are doing, not only here in Virginia, but I go around the country and I talk about Firefly. Rural Band, I'm going to talk about Surrey County in just a hot second. Rural Band is done by Prince George Electric Cooperative, again, Surrey County. Be Online. I love these logos, right? I mean, Firefly and Be Online. Be Online is Craig Botetourt County Electric Cooperative, or not County Electric, Craig Botetourt Electric Cooperative. Empower Broadband, which is Mecklenburg Electric Cooperative, and then Bark Connects, which is, well, the Bark Cooperative in Bath and Rockbridge counties. So we're seeing electric cooperatives move into retail broadband, and I don't want to explain why they are, but there's some interesting reasons why this is happening. And in Virginia's become one of the leaders in the country of electric cooperative broadband. And I think for me, one of the major reasons why they've been so successful is because that they're trusted. There is something powerful about seeing your broadband provider at the grocery store or at church or at the library and being able to say like, hey, Chris, my broadband's out, what the hell? Right? Versus trying to call the Comcast thing from death and desperately try to, sorry, I really hope no one from Comcast is listening to this. I don't think Comcast doesn't like me that much, but there is something powerful about it being local, right? So again, if there's another piece of advice I could give this community is to go local when you can go local, right? All right, Surrey County, Virginia. This is a study that my colleague Nicholas Matthews, who is now at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and I did during the pandemic. We identified the least connected county in Virginia, and that at that point was Surrey County, had about 3% connectivity. And we wanted to understand, again, this is during the pandemic, summer 2020, what is life like in a broadband desert? Now, obviously we couldn't go down there because there was a travel problem. So we called people and folks told us their stories about the lack of internet. And what we found is that community members were stuck in a loop of waiting. And we found 3 different types of waiting. And this strikes me as, so one of them is waiting for connectivity, right? I'll believe it when I see it, right? People just being so frustrated, these promises, but they're not happening. And again, we saw examples of folks needing their cell phones and stuff and paying exorbitant amounts. There was, for those who were connected, they were waiting for websites to load because they had subpar technology. And one of them said, load effort, like just getting so frustrated when their websites wouldn't load. And the third one to me is the most powerful. And we heard from a family who had to wake up. They would take like a disco nap in the evening and wake up at midnight because that's when their data cap ended and they could start downloading again. So this is a family with kids who they all woke up at midnight to do their homework, to download their movies, to do their taxes, and they called themselves a second shift family. A second shift family. And if there's anything that I want to do in my professional life is to make sure this country has no more second shift families when it comes to the internet. It's like so powerful. And thankfully, and this is where I was going to talk about Rural Band. Rural Band, Prince George Electric Cooperative, is now serving the entire area of Surrey County in the last 2 years, which is just amazing. So they're making sure, at least in Surrey County, there are no more second shift families. All right, I know we're drawing to the end, and I've been talking for a while. So let's talk about broadband in Virginia in particular, right? There's a couple of estimates around, the FCC says that about 93.6% of the Commonwealth is connected at 25.3, about 91.2% at 100. Those numbers are off. Like there's no way, but these are the official numbers. But we all know they're off, right? Because we all know neighbors and friends or us who are unconnected. We rank 31st among states in terms of connectivity. 31st, woof. We have 56% fiber in the Commonwealth. 8 out of 10 residents cannot purchase a plan of $60. 8 out of 10. A type of connectivity we see dial-up, about 1%. Broadband of any type, 87%. 12% only use their cell phone. 12% of Virginians only use their cell phone. And for those of you who are wondering, well, what's the point? I want you to try writing a college essay on your cell phone, right? I say this glibly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, but like, this is the difference. A cell phone is not a replacement for a fixed connection. And 6% are using satellite. 200,000 K through 12 students and 60,000 college students in the Commonwealth alone lack broadband. And just as an anecdote, when I was teaching at the University of Virginia in an elite public school in March of 2020, when we all went home, 50% of one of my classes could not do a Zoom call. So we ended up doing an entire semester using chat. We developed a chat room. It was like 1995 and we are chatting away, right? But we have to meet people where they are. It was not my business to punish my students or force them to go to a Starbucks because they couldn't get connected. I met them where they were, and that meant literally chat. 60,000 college students, 200,000 students. All right, funding. We've got an Office of Broadband, and there's a lot of money coming down the pipes, which is pretty cool. The VATI program, which is the flagship program here in Virginia, is $722 million, plus another $50 million. It's going to go into funding broadband deployment. The state or the Commonwealth did something really cool during the pandemic, and they had a $30 million fast track program, and this was for counties. So things like, the wireless on wheels. If counties needed money to get connectivity out now, they could apply to the Commonwealth, which was pretty cool. We just got $219 million from the Treasury Department for broadband. And then, like I said, we're estimated to get around 800 million. That number will change. This is just what I've heard through the grapevine. We'll get $800 million through the BEAD program. The goal of the Commonwealth is 100% connectivity by 2024. right? That's an ambitious goal. So we'll see if that happens. Okay, here's something I wanted to show you. And you remember I was talking about how these maps are really off? Okay, so bear with me for a second. This is the FCC's new map of our area. And in pink here is Albemarle County. In other pink is Charlottesville. Where you see dark blue, it is suggesting that those areas are 100% served. And what is the significance here? When I say 100% served, that means that those areas are no longer eligible for any of that money I just talked about. So if you are served on the map, you are ineligible for funding because you're served, right? So this is our area here, right? This is the FCC's map, okay? This map is from the Commonwealth of Virginia. The dark shaded in areas are the areas that have connectivity, and they have fiber connectivity. This is a little bit more likely, right? So this is a state. These are areas that can get, that were 95% of the community gets 100 down, 20 up, right? So this is a little bit more likely, right? But we're seeing, I'll shout really loud, a lot of unconnectivity throughout our area, throughout your area. And the last map I want to show is from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. Here we go. Okay, what are we looking at here? Red, everything. Okay, Admiral County is up there, right? That green means served. Red means unserved. Sorry, green means served. Red means unserved. Purpley shaded means low income areas. Take a look at, take a look at where low income and unserved areas are, right? Again, thinking about broadband as an equality and equity issue, the areas most likely to be unserved are the areas more likely to be low income. And a provider will say, oh, there's just not the market there, right? We don't get the return on investment. That's bullshit. You know, it means you don't want to serve them because they're poor folks, right? That's, I'm sounding glib here, but that's the truth, right? This is why this federal money is so important, to uplift these communities and get them connected. So these are three maps. I know we're sharing the PowerPoint, so I know I'm going pretty quickly, but just the discrepancy, right, between the FCC saying almost 100% served, Virginia saying, no, sweetie honey, is not at all. And then NTIA saying there are so many pockets of poverty that are unserved, right? This is crucial. All right, I'm actually going to skip some of these rules of counties for a sec. Okay, but what is keeping me up at night in the future of broadband? A lot of things keep me up at night. I'm a bad sleeper, right? The first, like I just said, is mapping. So the FCC just rolled out that new map, and we already know it's wrong, right? They spent $60 million on that map, and they got it wrong. Here's the problem, though. All of that federal money I said, that $65 billion, is going to rely on that map. If we get it wrong, we're going to have a problem, right? The NTIA, who's administering this money, has already said they're not going to use this first map because it's wrong. So many discrepancies. You can challenge, and this is one of the things I'm going to talk about right at the end. You can challenge the map. You can go onto the map, you can put your address in, and they'll tell you who your providers are and if you're served. If you're not served, you can challenge that. And that's something I would encourage you and your clients to do. But you can't use a speed test, which is really frustrating. You can't say, oh, FCC says I get a gigabit, but I only get 400 megabits. You can't actually say that. You have to find other evidence. It does make it very hard to challenge, but there's a challenge process available. And so what we're actually seeing is a lot of communities and counties and states developing their own map. Like I said, how Virginia developed its own map. So what will happen is that the NTIA will use the FCC's map, that big blue map, to determine how much money Virginia gets. Then Virginia will use its own map to decide which communities get funding. So this is why these state maps are so important. So mapping is keeping me up at night. State readiness is keeping me up at night. States do crucial roles when it comes to broadband, stakeholder outreach and policy and planning and funding and program evaluation. But a lot of states are not ready to handle the amount of money that is about to come down the pipes. And I'm going to give you an example. Texas, a big state. Texas is probably going to get a couple $2 billion. Texas has 2 people working for their state broadband office. We have 13, and the director of broadband here in Virginia, Dr. Tamara Holmes, is brilliant, and she knows exactly what she's doing. So I think Virginia is in very, very good hands. Wish I could say the same about Pennsylvania, but we're working on it. We're working on it, right? But there is this concern about, because what happens if a state isn't ready and then a major company rolls in with a great briefing book and says, trust us, we'll do it. And they're not ready to ask the right questions. So this is part of what I do in my work, is to make sure states and communities and counties are ready to ask the right questions to anyone who might try and gobble up some of their federal money. Funding is a big concern of mine. We need to make sure that history does not repeat itself. Remember I said that one of the problems was that a lot of the money just went to the largest companies and bypassed the fiber links, the Nelson counties, right? We need to make sure that history does not repeat itself. I told you about the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's going to run out in 2024. What happens when the money runs out? And at the end of the day, even when wires in the ground, let's say 5 years go by, we spend $42 billion. Just because wires are in the ground doesn't mean these companies are going to be profitable, particularly in rural, remote, and tribal areas. So we need to make sure there's subsidies for them, because there's just not enough humans. There's not enough humans living in rural, remote, and tribal areas to have a market. This is why we need federal investment. This is why we need federal money. So what's going to happen then? And like I said, the digital divide is not chronic. It is chronic. It's not acute. It's not going to be solved just because we pump $65 billion into it. We're going to have to keep educating folks. We're going to have to keep updating technologies, right? We're going to have to keep staying vigilant. All right. So the question, as I'm wrapping up now, I got 5 minutes, husband? Okay. All right. Is how do we make the most out of this once in a generation moment, right? $65 billion are going to be coming down the pipes in the next 5 years. How do we make sure we don't squander it? And here is my recommendations. And goodness, I didn't realize that was going to be so small, because I'll read this off. Here are some suggestions for me to you, right? When it comes to the thinking that you can do about broadband. The first is to avoid thinking in binaries. This is not about haves and have-nots. This is about gray areas. It's not about rural versus urban. This is about all of us, right? 18% of New York City doesn't have access to the internet. And New York City is anything but rural. So we need to stop thinking about it's rural and urban, it's have and have not. It's the gray areas that are so important. Educate yourselves on digital inclusion. I mean, having me here is awesome, and I can provide more resources and more reading and more opportunities to get yourselves updated. Here's something I think CAAR can play a major role as an organization, which is to get involved in Virginia's 5-year broadband plan. Report what your clients are telling you. You can do this to the state, right? You can contact Dr. Holmes, who's authoring the plan, and through her office and say, hey, as CAAR, we're hearing this from our residents, from our clients, from our communities. Get involved. You have a very powerful voice here. Use that voice for connectivity. You might want to think about sponsoring a digital navigators program. And again, digital navigators are those community members who can help other folks kind of troubleshoot, right? Imagine if we did digital navigator training with all of you, and a client calls you up and says, hey, Ben, like, we haven't talked in 2 years, but my internet's out. I know you know something about this. What do I do? Or how do I send this document? As a digital navigator, you'll be empowered to help those people. Advocate in the state for what's called dig once policies. I didn't put this up there, but one of the things that does keep me up at night. Dig once is, okay, let's say we're repairing a highway, right? We're ripping it up, putting it back in. 2 years later, we realize we need fiber optics down that highway. We rip it up again and we put the fiber optics down there, right? Dig once means that whenever we're planning building projects, we make sure that there are fiber optic conduits. Dig once is not a law in Virginia. And so as Virginia is getting a ton of this infrastructure money for transportation and for broadband, we might see a lot of waste happening because we're going to rip up a highway or a bridge and then have to do it again in 2 years when we want to put fiber. This is called dig once. And my advice to you, my professional advice with my professor hat on, is to advocate for dig once policies. I said we can challenge those FCC maps, and I will provide to anyone the website. You can go on, you can type your address in. There are 2 things we can look at. One, is your address actually there and where it is? So for instance, our new house in State College, the FCC's map actually has us on the other side of the street. So I can log in and challenge that and say, actually, no, we're on this side of the street. That's called location challenge. There's another type of challenge called availability. It says, you can get Comcast at a gigabit, and you're like, no, Comcast has never said that. You can challenge that as well. There are 2 types of challenges you can do, and you can encourage your clients to do that as well. Challenge these maps, because the more challenges we have, the better these maps will get, which means the more money our communities will get from the federal government. We can also avoid the hype. And I'm thinking particularly of Starlink and 5G. And one of the things that really make me cringe is when a community tells me, hey, you know what, we hear Starlink is pretty cool, it's going to happen, so we're going to pause our deployment plans because Starlink will do it. They're not coming. Starlink is literally cherry picking houses right now because they're having a capacity issue. So they're not going to look at entire communities. So keep encouraging your communities, your counties to do their broadband planning. You know, this goes without saying, but become a vocal supporter of fiber optics in un- and underserved areas in your communities. Remember that broadband is a local issue, so you can champion your local communities in this way. You know, Orange County is doing some amazing things with a company called FiberLink. Celebrate that, champion that. You know, I'm thinking like, you know, whenever Virginia has a press release that says Orange County just got Virginia money for broadband, CAAR can be like, hey, good for Orange County, or Albemarle getting Firefly broadband. This is awesome. Publicize it, celebrate this. These are accomplishments. Challenge digital redlining when you see it. Right? Challenge digital redlining when you see it. It is happening in Albemarle County. It is happening throughout Virginia. So when you're on one side of the street and the other side of the street and you're running your speed tests, you see something's off, you can challenge that. You can challenge that again with the state. Two things now, accurately list broadband access in your MLS. And this is something Ben and I have been talking about a lot in the last few years, is that high-speed internet is not good enough as a marker. High-speed internet can mean satellite, it can mean DSL, it can mean fiber, right? We need to get specific. We have seen so much urban flight from DC in the last few years because of the pandemic, and these people want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to remote work. This is a boon to our rural communities when folks can do this. These are tax dollars, but they need high capacity, affordable, high performance broadband. And as realtors, my charge to you is to investigate this. Who is the provider? What are their speeds? This is all publicly available information. I'm happy to share where you can find this information for every address, right? So make sure that when you're listing and when you're talking to clients, it's not just high-speed internet. High-speed internet can cover a lot of evils. So remember, not all broadband is equal. And last but not least, I know this goes without saying in this kind of room, but ask your clients about their connectivity needs and ambitions. What do your clients need? Because they're probably, if they're coming from an urban area, probably not going to ask you if there's internet. They're going to assume it's there. So one of the questions to ask when you're asking is bedrooms and square footage and fenced in backyards is, what do you need from your internet connection, right? You know, are you working from home? Are you doing Zoom calls, right? What do you need? Because that's going to be a major factor. So I like to conclude my presentations, and this is a little bit selfish on my end, so forgive me, is to do a bit of to read you the last page of my book. And I do this because I think it captures nicely everything I've been talking about today. So I'm going to beg your indulgence for 2 paragraphs while I conclude my presentation today. I got to find the page now. A lot of citations. All right, here we go. I'm continually struck by something Bernadine Jocelyn, Director of Public Policy and Engagement at Minnesota's Blandin Foundation, told me in her interview for this book. Everything is better with better broadband. I repeat it here and throughout this book to shed a clear, bright light on a complex issue. This is not a technically determinist argument. The mere existence of broadband in a rural community does not correct rural inequality, although the lack of connectivity certainly does not help. Instead, I invoke this phrase to demonstrate how broadband, rural broadband, and broadband policy are lived and experienced, or not, on the ground in rural communities throughout the country. Broadband policy, such as it is, may be written in Washington, D.C., with legal prose refined at the headquarters of AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink, Windstream, and Frontier, but it is lived in Laverne, Minnesota, McKee, Kentucky, and Mineral, Virginia. At its furthest reach, Jocelyn's phrase parallels conversations occurring at the United Nations and the European Union about whether internet access can be called a human right, akin to the rights to information, education, and participation. Closer to home, it reminds us that at the end of the day, broadband is not about policy, politics, technology, or money. It is about people. When deployed democratically and harnessed inclusively, everything can be better with better broadband. From work to homework to voting to health to talking with grandma. Everything is better with better broadband is a call to end the rural-urban digital divide and the multitude of digital divides brought on by inequality in the United States. And with that, I thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your energy, and I look forward to the conversation. Good.
Well, thank you very much for that. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Christopher Alley, Neil, and myself to the stage for the question and answer portion of the program. If you would like to ask a question, there are index cards. If you can just raise your hand, staff will come around and grab it because our in-person audience cannot be heard by the Zoom audience. If you are on Zoom today, please ask a question through the Zoom toolbar through the chat menu, and staff will pass that question along to us. Neil, would you like to get started with your question and answers?
Sure. Wow. Yeah, fresh batteries and giving Neil a mic, never a good idea. In thinking about broadband, and thank you for your presentation, there's been some discussion throughout the region and the nation about this idea of broadband and comparing it to the electrification of the rural area and broadband as a utility. Do you have any thoughts of that regarding that specific?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts. Chapter 1 of my book is all about this. Okay, so here, a little bit of a long-winded explanation to this. In March of 2021, President Biden said broadband is the next electricity. And a lot of times we can think about that as just meaning, well, broadband is as essential now as electricity was in the 1930s. But when I look at it, and when I've done my historical research on how we actually connected this country to the electrical grid, when we see something like broadband is the next electricity, it is a challenge to think about how do we connect a country. So when we connected the country in the 1930s and 1940s, this was in FDR's New Deal, and he created something called the Rural Electrification Administration, and now it's now called the Rural Utility Service under the USDA. And one of the things that I think was brilliant, well, two things. One, they bypassed the large power companies and they created local electric cooperatives. This is how all these electric cooperatives came to be. And now they're providing broadband, which is awesome. They did this through loans, through very, very low interest loans. The other thing the REA did, which I think is brilliant, and I would love to see us replicate this, is they didn't stay in Washington. They went out into the communities and did what was called the REA circuits, where they taught folks how to use electricity. I mean, this is digital equity and inclusion, except electricity inclusion and equity. They taught people how to use fridges. Yes, they were selling fridges from Maytag, but they also, they taught people how to use a washing machine, right? Imagine if we could do this. Imagine if we can empower local communities, just like we did in the 1930s and 40s. The Rural Electrification Administration was incredibly successful. Incredibly so successful, in fact, that in 1949, they also got control over rural telephone to do the exact same thing. So they went local, and that's where I'm excited about. I think the parallel here is that we also need to go local.
Great, Ben?
You got a mic. No, I've got a mic. I think, I don't know, like you really kind of took it all there. I think you've got it. I think the key is local. And I know that there are some national providers that are doing good things. We talked about the Crozet area is getting fiber now through CenturyLink, but overall, we're not seeing the connectivity, the inclusion on a national level. It's got to come locally to do that, and we need the support and the voice to make that happen.
Just to bring it home, earlier this month, I guess it was earlier this month, the Albemarle Broadband Authority, which I always think of Dancing Queen because it's ABBA, it went forth with a request for a extension. They had received, I think it was $2.3 million to connect 1,600 customers to fiber, and they've run into delays. It was CenturyLink was the original provider, then it was Lumos, and now you guys are going to hear a new term called Brightspeed, which is buying Lumos. And it is, and they've requested an extension to be able, they have connected, I think it's 500 or 600 folks, and they still have 1,000 to go. But paying attention, I will say that how many of you have actually been to an ABBA meeting on Zoom? Very good. I knew somebody else was in the room. The level of detail these meetings go into, you know, the state, you had mentioned the state that has two people working on, right now, there are two people in Albemarle, that's all they're working on is ABBA projects. And literally they're saying, our truck got a flat. The provider's truck got a flat and it delayed things by half a day. So your implementation date is moved by half a day. Well, that's the kind of detail I want as somebody receiving service. And so I encourage folks to pay attention to what ABBA is doing. I think Albemarle was a little ahead of itself, ahead of the game prior to the COVID coming about. And now with really Nelson and Firefly and others coming forward, they're a little bit in a weird place with this authority. But paying attention to the local level is critically important. Question for you, Ben. We heard a little bit in Chris's remarks regarding the MLS and ways that we could better improve the broadband information. In thinking about the MLS, I always think about, well, what information is in there now and how is it verifiable as being the source of the source? So, you know, you have the schools in there and that's very clear because you have a place to get that. Is there a place that we could get information and what level of detail would be appropriate for the MLS to list not high-speed internet, but the upload and download speed perhaps?
There is. I think that actually would be important. I also say that I think a lot of people don't understand necessarily the download speeds. We do. We just talked about it. We just heard what it is. But to put those download speeds and really break down, I think we need to probably re-clarify the differences in internet. We've done a lot of work during the pandemic and I applaud our MLS work groups. They've done a lot and we've added things to the MLS. We've added the fiber, we've added DSL and stuff on there. I'm not seeing it utilized, which is a huge problem. And I'm sure that you all have seen this too. I've got a lot of clients in rural areas and I go on and I don't know how to answer the question of what the internet is because the listing doesn't have it. So we can add the speeds on there to help but I think initially and most importantly, that needs to be a required field. You cannot put a listing if you don't check the box of what the internet is at the house. If your client doesn't know, which we all have some that do not use technology, that's fine. We can go on, we can provide the website to figure out what it is and what's eligible and what's there. That has to be a requirement. I also am going to go a little bit step further because I just saw this the other day and it threw me off and I asked Chris for clarification because I didn't think it was right. I'm seeing a lot of notes in the realtor only section of the MLS that list high-speed internet or upgraded DSL. There's no such thing as upgraded DSL. And I caution to say lie, but what you're putting in there is not true. When we put stuff in there, when we add to it, outside of what is in the MLS, fiber, cable, Xfinity, DSL, satellite, if you expand on those yourself, you are pushing your business into a gray danger zone. Because if I take and save the MLS printed and I save it and then my client buys it and they say I can't do work and you advertised it this way, that we're going to be in a problem. We've all seen lawsuits around the country for different things with MLSs and brokerages and stuff. I caution you to put anything outside of those buttons in the MLS when it comes to internet.
It sounds to me that just the fact that we're starting to see some of those types of comments in the realtor agent notes, that means that we need to have more specific required fields and maybe not the upload download speed per se as a required field, but definitely what providers are available to what level, et cetera, et cetera. And that information is so much more available to all of us now to find out online. If the seller doesn't know, then we can find out that information ourselves.
It is. And I will say, you know how we can't be the source of information, but we can direct it. When you take square footage for a house and you say it's deemed reliable, but not necessarily accurate. Same thing with the websites. If we go onto the website and the FCC or something says these things are available, if it's off a little bit, we're protected. But as soon as we put our own opinion on is, oh, it's good enough and they can do all of this and they've never had a problem. that's a very dangerous place to get, very dangerous place to get.
So two websites I just want to shout out for all of you. One is broadbandnow.com, broadbandnow.com. You can type in any address and it will give you who the providers are. The other, so that's broadbandnow.com. The other is speedtest.net. Speedtest.net, you can actually get an app on your phone. You can it's an opportunity you can go into a house so long as the internet's turned on and you can run a speed test. So you can actually tell your clients if they know the uploads and downloads, and of course you all know the uploads and downloads too. So you'll be able to say, okay, this is what you're getting right now. And again, take a look at that FCC map, put the client's address in or put the house address in, and you'll be able to see what type of service they're getting right from the horse's mouth at the Federal Communications Commission. So fcc.gov, broadbandnow.com, speedtest.net. fcc.gov. Or you can just Google FCC broadband map and the whole map will pop up for you. And again, you can do it by the address, which is an improvement. I mean, it's not accurate, but it'll get you one step closer.
All right, an anecdote, I was involved in a real estate transaction not that long ago of raw land, and I was very excited because there was a post there that said fiber line, do not dig. It's like, I got fiber internet in front of it. Turns out that was feeding the cell tower and I can't tie into it. So it's not always what you see, as you guys well know. But the question is, with the push, because I know Albemarle has said they are seeking to have universal broadband by 2025. I think Nelson is 2024. And I know that the Firefly folks are doing 13 counties. 2 of the counties, Madison and Greene, are being done with hanging technology versus digging technology. So it should take less time, one might think. Is this going to all go away, or are we always going to have this digital divide if they achieve with all this money the broadband, universal broadband across these small on a locality basis?
The digital divide is never going to go away, ever. Part of it is, so $65 billion, $42 billion for deployment. It's actually not enough. We're still going to continue to see unserved and underserved communities. But when I see the digital divide is always going to happen, is always going to exist, it's because new technologies are always going to be rolled out to urban areas and wealthy areas first, right? Think about cell phones, right? They're going to be available to wealthy folks before low-income folks. We're going to have to train and retrain. Digital training is cradle to grave, right? What we're teaching our 4-year-olds how to type, maybe how to do a Google search, is very different than we're teaching our teenagers about mis and disinformation online, which is very different from adults needing to book a COVID vaccine or doing their groceries online. We're always going to have to train and retrain with new technologies. So it actually makes me cringe. And actually, I'm writing an article on this right now. When I hear someone say, we're going to close the digital divide, or we're going to end the digital divide, we're not. And that's okay. We need to think about sustainability. Right. So it's not just flash in the pan library courses. It's how do we think about funding ongoing yearly digital education courses? How do we teach people to know the difference between a fake news article? That's also about digital literacy. That's also digital skill training. And that's going to change as this gets more sophisticated as well. So the digital divide will not end. It will end when we end inequality, right? Which is a great noble goal, but we need to be thinking beyond the mass amount of money that's going to come down the pipes, because it will run out and then we're still going to have and underconnected folks.
I mean, I agree. I think we're doing a huge amount of work locally, state, national on deploying the internet. But once it's fully deployed, we get back to the affordability. And that is always going to be an issue. And it doesn't, we have a huge affordability problem with our minority communities, and they will always struggle, and we've got to find ways to help them immediately and long term. But even for the rest of us or everybody, it really depends on who your internet provider is. I'll call out Ting here because they've been huge for us. They have some very reasonable packages for fiber internet, but if you have Comcast Xfinity, and there's a small pockets of Xfinity fiber around, it's 2 and 3 times more expensive. So just because you get the technology doesn't mean that everybody that's there has the ability to buy and pay for that. which is a problem.
Well, it speaks to the next question. I know Ting, for instance, has just rolled out in Arlington, extensive work utilizing something called micro trenching. And Charlottesville has not endorsed this. Can you explain what micro trenching is and how it works?
Yeah, so micro trenching is what it sounds like, which is you're not having to dig up the entire road. You can actually just dig a couple of inches in, and then you would lay your fiber optic conduit throughout there. There's the data on micro trenching in terms of cost saving is ambivalent, to say the least. I do not know why Charlottesville, it surprised me to hear that, as Ting has been such a good partner with Charlottesville, why they would forbid this. And I know certainly for Ben and I, it was very frustrating because Ting is quite literally 1 block away from our house, or from our former house, and our poles are actually overloaded. And so they couldn't string it aerially. So the only way they could do it to our house was micro trenching. And of course, Charlottesville has forbidden this. But I think this is where, you know, if I could take a step back, this is where we need to make sure that communities have all of the right information to make the right choices for them. And this is where I'm concerned. Again, I'm not, since I wasn't familiar about why Charlottesville made this decision, but I have seen this before where communities are making the wrong choices because they got bad information. So how do we make sure, and this is something where I've positioned myself as a professor and educator, where if someone has got a question, they know they can come to me and say, hey, what does this mean? Or, you know, and by someone, I mean a community, a county, a board of supervisors. So we need to make sure that our communities are equipped with the right information to make the right digital choices for themselves. What's going to work in Charlottesville will not work in Arlington, will not work in Mineral, but we need to make sure that every community is empowered to make the right choices for them. And I agree. I don't think it was the right choice for Charlottesville to ban microtrenching. You know, I'll when we're having drinks, I'll tell some things that are not supposed to be on the record as to what my thoughts are about who might have convinced them.
I think Charlottesville, Albemarle, our footprint really has led the way in a lot of aspects. I think they've made some catastrophic and discriminatory decisions lately when it comes to that. And microtrenching is one of them. You know, we lived in a nice area. We had a nice house. We can afford the more expensive plans from Xfinity. A lot of families can't. And when they made that decision to say no and blew off or canceled meetings and voted against it, they are permanently sticking families in digital divide where they will never be able to afford or never be able to gain access to the higher speed internet. And that is a big problem.
Did you want to refer to one of the questions from the audience?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions coming in from the audience and on Zoom. First one, and I'll throw this to Chris first. Dominion Energy seems to be very much behind electric co-ops in broadband deployment. Why is this, and are there any remedies available or being pursued?
Oh, holy smokes, that is a great question. This is where we can really get into the weeds of state policy. Okay, so we've got investor-owned utilities and we've got cooperative utilities, right? They are legislated differently. And so for a long time, Dominion and Appalachian Power were forbidden by law to get into broadband. That was a legislative decision. Electric cooperatives were able to do it. Dominion and Appalachian were not. Last year, a year and a half ago now, I can't remember what year we're in even, the General Assembly passed a law allowing Dominion and Appalachia Power, because they're investor-owned utilities, to open up what's called their middle mile. They are still forbidden from offering retail broadband. They still can't provide broadband to the home like Firefly or Be Online can. But what they can do is, this is going to get into the weeds of electrics, but all of their substations are connected by fiber optic cable. It's all digital, right? And so what they can do is they can have a partner, and this point it's going to be All Points Broadband, connect into their network. So they have a high capacity network, not for retail. They have an internet service provider connect into their network that will then provide the last mile, or the last mile. So they're opening up their middle mile, which saves All Points in this case a lot of money. But that was a legislative decision by the General Assembly. I doubt the General Assembly will go so far as to allow these investor-owned utilities to offer retail broadband. But in Dominion's credit and Appalachian's credit as well, they have been, as soon as that law passed, they have been doing some great partnerships in really remote and rural areas. So yeah, so we're never going to see, I don't think, Dominion Power offer retail broadband, but the middle mile projects are pretty cool. And I was glad to see the Assembly opening their minds to kind of these alternative providers, so that you're not always having to, because what happens, again, this is in the weeds, I'm sorry. The middle mile is basically owned by, a lot of giant companies like AT&T. And so they can have some draconian contracts. So when we open it to something more local, it's going to save your ISP money, which means it's going to save the consumers money.
Good, yeah. Neil, do you have anything you want to?
Well, I just so you know, because we saw all those great logos with bees and hornets and the rest. The legislation also prohibits the cooperatives from working directly as the provider. Thus, they had to create Firefly, even though it's a subsidiary of, for instance, Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. They had to have that subsidiary according to their legislative law, because again, it's Virginia government and we get complicated and in the weeds. But that's why you have Firefly.
The next one is not really a question, but more of a suggestion. It sounds like a CAAR project team could be formed to come up with ways to support 5-year broadband plan. Neil, do you want to weigh in? I know with your position, you've been involved with broadband, but do you want to weigh in on that to get more support?
Yeah, I think the suggestion is good. And one of the beauties of CAAR's master group system is that oftentimes we will put forth at your direction a project team that draws from the DEI group, because clearly this has DEI implications, but it also has public policy implications. So we'll pull from the government affairs group, and we'll often bring a member of the board of directors in, and whoever else needs to be in, as well as some members from the general public, to perhaps inform, because this is not something you just do, that will inform the discussion, and then they can be in support or whatever of the 5-year plan that's being developed on the state level. But we can share that information up through the group and through the board to the membership, and then to the Virginia Realtors, because we do have folks walking the halls of the General Assembly every day. And it's helpful for us to tell them what we're doing here. And we have a great relationship with our team at VR to do that. So a project team for this, I think, would work very well.
One more thing that I think, the director of the broadband office would welcome a call from this committee to say, what can we do? How can realtors best help this plan? And maybe that's a place to start too, is, points on just give her a call. Her goal, her job is to champion connectivity in the Commonwealth. And by you saying, I was at a meeting with her last week, and she invited these types of conversations. So that might be a place to start, actually, just to get a roadmap. What is it we can do as a community to help amplify this job?
Yeah, I agree. I think we are doing a lot. I know that over the last several years, CAAR has, as a organization, become more vocal in certain aspects of it. I think CAAR is probably the most powerful organization that exists when it comes to advocating for housing equality in our region. That's what realtors do. That's what we do on the state level. That's what we do on the national level. We can be a much louder voice in the broadband access when it comes to digital equity and inclusion. I think maybe doing that, I think we've got some phenomenal work groups and committees and councils that exist, and maybe a subcommittee and having one member from each of those just focus on broadband and do that is good. But we do have it, and we can really be that champion for our community, for our neighbors, and for those that need it. The next question I'm going to summarize here. As an organization of 1.5 million members, what policies or initiatives can be helpful or added to our own voices to help more specific policy that can truly have that impactful change in lower wealth areas? Because as you've said, it's about the have and have nots. Chris?
Well, I think where can I start? Okay, a couple of things I think which would be really good. And I think the 1.5 members would be the National Association. Okay, yeah. I mean, first of all, NAR has a massive voice, on Capitol Hill, right? So use that voice to endorse broadband. One of the things I'm seeing a lot of different organizations do, and shameless plug, as I've ghostwritten some of these, is come out with a broadband plan for their members. I just did one for the Virginia Funders Network, which is a consortium of local philanthropic groups under the umbrella of one called the Virginia Funders Network. And we wrote a guidebook on what can local funders do to help broadband. NAR could do that too, right? A guidebook, which can be very powerful. You can host webinars. You can put money towards, again, like I said, the Digital Navigators program. You can come out against digital redlining. Right? We have actually not seen a lot of community or a lot of organizations come out specifically and say, this is a bad actor. This is a bad thing to happen, right? I know y'all are the experts on redlining, right? You pushed against it. Now we need to push against it when it comes to the digital divide, and NAR has a huge voice. Changing MLSs to include more detail, educating realtors, just like we're doing here, right? Imagine if something like this has happened at every, association of realtors. I mean, there's a lot that y'all can do with 1.5 million members, and it is a tremendous voice and a tremendous presence on Capitol Hill. Use that voice would be my advice.
I think there's when I see the numbers that are being shared in Chris's presentation of the millions and billions of dollars, I'm reminded of all the president's men. Follow the money. We should know where every dollar goes, because I think that holding that accountable is going to be critically important to seeing that those funds are appropriately positioned and provided equally across the communities of the nation. I don't think that's happening, and that may just be me and my superstitious and paranoia, but I am convinced the more the government throws out money, the less it's done efficiently.
So chapter 2 of my book traces all of this money. If you want to read it, there's some good charts there.
Just a thought, we might be making some gains on economic equality, and then your presentation points out yet another way poor households fall behind. What can the average Joe do to bring internet access inequality to our discussions on equality? Do you have contact lists that allow us to bring this very real issue to the forefront of inclusion and equality?
Yes, and happy to share. Contact List is a great organization called the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which does a lot of great training. I use some of their slides already here with citation. The other thing I'm going to give ABBA a shout out here, because they have been some great dancing queens. Because one of the things that Albemarle County is actually doing is thinking about setting up a fund to augment the Affordable Connectivity Program for low-income families here in the county. Because quite frankly, if you're getting $30 a month, and the minimum subscription price is $50 a month, there's still a problem here, right? One of the things I've been advocating for is that if this subsidy is $30 a month, we should be forcing providers to offer a less than $30 a month high-speed tier. It should be free for low-income families, and it isn't. So Albemarle is really contemplating augmenting affordability programs for households, so we can get involved. There. Again, totally attend the ABBA meetings. They're a lot of fun. I like them. And there are the folks running broadband in Albemarle are smart and brilliant. And they are actually, and disclosures that I'm working with them on this, we're developing a digital equity plan for the county right now that will be thinking through a lot of these things, and we're going to be welcoming public comments. So follow along there. But I'd be happy to provide a list of great organizations that operate at the intersection of social, political, economic inequality, and how that relates back to digital divides.
Neil?
I will be a bit of a broken record here, but I run an organization that's nonpartisan, but the realtors have a PAC, our PAC, and these decisions are made by elected officials. and elected officials push their priorities forward. Support RPAC and pay attention. We'll be going through candidate review this year. Those things are critically important, and broadband is impacted by elections. Broadband deployment is impacted by elections. And so I would encourage you to stay plugged in and follow the Free Enterprise Forum blog, shameless plug for me, so that you can stay in tune with what's going on the local level, because all broadband is local.
It is. And we actually have in the state, some of our elected representatives are key players in broadband. Senator Mark Warner, key player in the Senate, and Congressperson Abigail Stanberger helped really push the broadband component in there. She's Virginia's 7th. So we've got broadband leaders already. And as a PAC, you can vet them. And maybe one of the qualities that when you vet your candidates about who you're supporting is, what are their stances on broadband? That would be great. I actually don't know a lot of PACs outside of the telecom PACs that do that. So maybe this is a good opportunity to really elevate broadband. This is something that really boils my potatoes. Is like, why don't we think about broadband policy along the lines of health policy and economic policy and foreign development policy? Because we can't actually achieve any of these things without connectivity. So let's raise the profile, and PACs are a great way to do that.
I gotta steal, boil my potatoes and disco nap.
The next one's just a comment. Upload and download speeds vary by the time of day when cable is involved. I'm gonna steal Chris's answer just so we can stay on time here. Yes, it does. There's a lot of problems with that. The more people in your neighborhood, on your street, that are using cable, so Comcast, Xfinity, and others, you're going to get the bog down, which is why he gave the story about getting on at midnight, because they needed that higher speed when nobody else in the area was on it. It also depends on how far you are from the box where the system comes in, or sorry, DSL. So yes, that is a huge problem. That's why we really need to switch over and push out the fiber through our communities. Last question that I have is, and I'm gonna go to Neil first here, because I know Chris doesn't have access to this map, but how reliable is the Virginia broadband map link on Paragon? So what actually does that link take us to?
I will say that one of the goals of the Free Enterprise Forum is to have that wall between Paragon and all of the all of that material. So I can't answer that question, but I will say that the maps, everyone from the Board of Supervisors to the State House to the governor believes the maps are wrong. And they're wrong because the methodology used was, if they could find one in a census block, it used to be one person receiving internet, there was 100% connectivity in that census block, one building. So I will say that mapping is a huge issue, and I can't tell you the right source for that data. That's my answer.
It routes us, and I may be a little wrong here, I'm not the expert on where this link goes on Paragon that we have, but I think it takes us to a map, broadband data map provided by Virginia Tech.
Yeah, that's so the Commonwealth partnered with Virginia Tech to do the state broadband map. That's the second map I showed you. It'll go to a link called Commonwealth Connect. That is the state's broadband portal. I'm assuming, so if it's going to the Virginia Tech map, obviously I don't have access to it, but yeah, they partnered with Tech to do this. The state map will be more accurate. As I showed you the three maps, the state map will be more accurate than the map provided by the Federal Communications Commission. So I would say trust the state map, and the state map is independent of the FCC's map. It's not like they're pulling that data and revetting it. They're collecting their own information.
I have one last question on here. The considering the deadlines that we talked about for universal broadband, what level of confidence do you have that these localities and these fireflies and red bugs, or whatever they are, will achieve the universal broadband goals of 2025, 2026, whatever it is?
That's a great question. I have a lot of confidence in the electric cooperatives to do what they've promised to do. I think that once we see them partner with counties, these have been incredibly strong partnerships. Rappahannock County, Surrey County, Nelson County obviously has shown that these public-private partnerships can be tremendously valuable. And I'm a big fan. I really think that public-private partnerships are going to be the way to connect this country. You know, when we throw out numbers like we're going to connect everybody by 2024, I always get a little squirmish because that's just so big and so ambitious. And I appreciate that Virginia has been one of the leaders in throwing, I mean, $700 million. This was a plan designed by then Governor Northam and now implemented by Governor Youngkin. That is still ongoing. The ambition is there, the drive is there, the money is finally there, because 5 years ago we were only giving $1 million a year to broadband. 700 million now, hopefully 800 million. So we're going to get close. We're going to get really, really close. I really do think so, if we do it right. If we replicate what's happened before, we're going to need another $65 billion in 10 years. And that when I said the funding is keeping me up at night. So I guess we could say that I'm, at least for Virginia, I'm not particularly optimistic about the entire country in these goals, but like, I think we're in a very good position to make some very good headway. Maybe not in the next year and a half, but let's say in the next 5 years. I think we'll see some big connectivity jumps.
And those public-private partnerships generally are leveraging federal funds from the VATI funds and local funds as well. And so you have to have that match. So when your locality comes forward with that, it's important to recognize those matches are leveraged in their broadband deployment. Ben?
I agree. I think we are going to do a really good job. We're doing phenomenal work. I actually am not confident at all that we're going to meet that by the 2024-2025 guide deadline here. I think we're going to get there. I don't think we're going to meet it. You look at Nelson County with Firefly, who has done amazing work and has taken the lead. They're almost already connected. They're going to be 100% or 98% connected by 2024. Louisa has taken a huge step forward and is rapidly catching up with the deployment. Albemarle was leading initially. They formed the organizations at the beginning. They've fallen way behind. You look at Louisa County compared to Albemarle County square mileage wise, Louisa's only or 25% of the size of Albemarle. We're talking about 800 plus square miles for Albemarle County. We're already behind physically with the length of time that it takes and the manpower that it takes to deploy that internet. I don't see how we would ever have it done like they want by 2025. It is coming. We will get there, but I don't think that we're going to hit that goal. All right. That wraps up our presentation here for broadband. I'd like to thank Dr. Christopher Alley and Neil Williamson for joining us today. It was a great discussion. Please join me in a round of applause for that presentation. Before we adjourn for our holiday reception, I'd like to invite each member of the DEI Council to join me on stage today. Roxanne Carter-Johnson, our DEI Chair, Lisa Herndon, the CAAR 2023 President and DEI Council Board Liaison for this year, Janice O'Hare, Shannon Thomas, and Tom Wolford. On stage, please. As a council, we wanted to remind members of the past, present, and future DEI support that you can rely on from us. So we'll turn it over and start with you, Roxy. Can you share a little bit about the mission and vision of our council?
Of course, I can. Our vision is to create and preserve an unwavering focus on policies, procedures, and practice that uphold the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our mission is to build a diverse, equitable, and inclusive association that spreads across the leadership by removing barriers to access and opportunity. We want to provide a DEI lens and offer feedback and insight on issues impacting our association and our local real estate industry.
Thank you. I think as Lisa Herndon had to step out for just a second, so we'll circle back to her. Janice, Janice, can you speak on the types of speakers that we have had this year?
Certainly. We have been focusing a lot on our own local history within Charlottesville, especially regarding the renewal, urban renewal in the Vinegar Hill area. In July, we had Jordy Yeager, a local author and researcher, speak about how racial segregation continues to shape today's housing market. Most recently, we were joined by Jordy, Lorenzo Dickerson, and local realtor Waukee Wynn in a panel discussion after watching the moving documentary Raised. If you did not see, if you didn't get a chance to participate in that, those sessions are available on the CAAR YouTube channel. They will be soon. And you can view the documentary Raised on PBS anytime, streaming. And just realize it is essential that we as realtors understand what happened in our own backyard and the impacts that are still felt today.
That's so true. Thank you very much, Janice. Let's jump back. Lisa Herndon, can you share what types of DEI events CAAR has hosted in the past?
Can y'all hear me okay? You can't? Okay, I was looking at Pat. Pat said she couldn't. Apologize. I stepped out to get something from my throat. My throat is kind of dry, so I wasn't trying to avoid this suction of it. We have been, yes, Ben, I can. We have been fortunate to receive 2 National Association of Realtors grants, $5,000 grants each, to host influential speakers to help broaden our mindset and to possibly change the way we think about things and possibly change some of the outcomes of our decision making. In 2020, we hosted a 3-part series with the Color of Law author Richard Rothstein. In 2021, we had Dr. James Saunders, who was the author, one of 2 authors of The Urban Renewal and the End of Black Culture in Charlottesville, Virginia. So it set a map and gave details about our local history. And a lot of people didn't know about Vinegar Hill. He talked a lot about Vinegar Hill within that book as well. So we've had a lot of different influential speakers. And if you happen to miss any of that, we do have those sessions available. It's always good to relook at them anyway on our CAAR's YouTube channel. I hand it back over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Shannon, where can the members go to find DEI resources?
The council created a DEI resources webpage earlier this year, and we continue to add vetted resources to it. You can review a variety of resources to help you grow and be mindful of how you speak, behave, and treat one another. You'll be able to access the NAR, VAR, and CAAR member demographics, which is very telling, as well as review a list of recommended videos, books, and movies. Also, after popular demand, we will be publishing our DEI resources webpage to the public portion of CAAR.com. That way everyone can benefit from it, not just our members. If you do have a DEI resource to recommend, please email us at DEI@CAAR.com.
And that DEI@CAAR.com goes to the entire council, so all of us will get that email. Thank you very much. Tom, I'll turn it over to you with the last question here. How many members connect with the DEI Council?
Thank you, Ben. As Shannon mentioned, and you can contact all of us at DEI@CAAR.com, that email address. We are looking for people who want to get involved on the council. The only requirement of any sort is that you have an interest, you care about this, and you want to help further the mission of the DE&I Council. So I will say, if you'd like to do that, the deadline for signing up for CAAR in 2023 is tomorrow. So we'd like to see you come on board soon. And then if you have some suggestions for us as far as events or people to get in contact with, anything that would involve this association or the local community or even throughout the Commonwealth, we'd like to hear from you. Ben, back to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. If you're new to DEI, we welcome you. We're very excited that you're here. We appreciate you taking the first steps, in which is you showing up to these events and being part of that conversation. We hope that you take advantage of all the work the council is doing to help make us better as a whole, and us and you better as an individual. Our council is very excited to roll out another resource for you today, this will be the first time that is being mentioned. We have created a DEI library here at CAAR. We have invested in a series of books to help you, colleagues, peers, and even your family to understand DEI and how it touches everyone. Please browse the books available and take a CAAR DEI bookmark during our holiday reception that will follow this. The bookmark has QR codes that will take you directly to these websites. The books in our DEI library can be checked out for a period of 3 weeks. We already have multiple books on multiple topics, and we are constantly adding more to them. And so at this time, I will close today's session. And for those of you here in person, I invite you to join us for food, beverages, and more conversation in the library. And happy holidays to all. Yes, sir.
We will make sure before you leave today that we will have your information. And David, thank you so much.
You're good. We got you covered. Again, thank you for today, and happy holidays to everybody.